And we're joined here on the news at 7 with frequent guest, Professor Laura Wilson, political science professor with the University of Indianapolis. Professor Wilson, thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Professor Wilson, as often has in the news business, I sort of have a plan of what I'm going to ask you. I have my first question or two set, and then breaking news happens and things change. So we had some breaking news just this afternoon, and I want to read it to you, and then I want to get your reaction to it. Okay, ABC News is reporting that both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have agreed to a September 10th presidential debate. There have been a lot of discussions about this, obviously, Professor, but this is our first confirmation of it. Your reaction?
Well, I think this is tremendous news. And we'd heard previously that President Trump wasn't interested in debating Vice President Harris. And then we'd heard that, in fact, he was reconsidering it. But I think this is fantastic for the American public, because understanding this is an opportunity to see Vice President Harris and former President Donald Trump together on stage, responding to each other, showcasing their policies and platforms. And the only presidential debate we've had thus far this campaign was with half of the stage of a different candidate in terms of Joe Biden, right? So to have this opportunity for voters, I think, is really important. It's great for the campaigns, too, because this is a longer form where they're able to tell about themselves and really try to convince voters that they're the best candidate for the job. You just can't do that in 30 and 60-second ad buys. And so I think it's great that we have a debate. It's really nice it's coming up in September, because people will start to make their decisions, start to form their opinions and ideas about the candidates. And I'm thrilled they were able to come to this.
Professor Wilson, I want to know if you are surprised. And what I mean specifically by that is, are you surprised that former President Trump has agreed to this? Now, the reason I ask that is because the data has shown that based off of the first debate, the majority of voters felt that Trump won the first debate. In fact, the first debate being so consequential that the current president, Joe Biden, mostly because of that performance in the first debate, is no longer in the race. So if you're the Trump campaign, you won the first debate. You don't have any obligation to future debates. Vice President Harris is an unknown quantity on this stage. You don't exactly know what you're stepping into. Are you surprised that Trump has agreed to this debate?
I'm not surprised. And I think a large factor that influences this decision would have to be looking at the polls, right? We know we have 7 swing states. After that consequential debate, as you mentioned, before Biden dropped out, he was losing beyond a margin of error relative to Donald Trump. And Trump was in the lead as far as the race was going until you had Harris step in. And now there are many polls that show, again, it's a very close race. And so for Donald Trump, this is another opportunity to use the debate stage as his strength to reach American people, to talk to the voters. He's obviously a very controversial candidate, but he has a lot of experience in debating, given the 2016, the 2020, now the 2024 presidential election. Harris has participated in debates as a presidential candidate, but that was way back in 2020 when she was still in the primary election. So I think she's certainly the more unknown quantity, but this is, again, an opportunity for her. So I actually think this is a really good strategy for both candidates. And typically the time a candidate wants to refrain from a debate is if it's going to hurt them. If they're already leading in the polls, they have less incentive to participate. This particular race, very close. Both candidates want to reach out to voters. They want to have this opportunity. And I think they're probably both enthusiastic now to take the stage.
I want to ask you about the state of Indiana, the beautiful state of Indiana, my home state, a state that I grew up in, went to college in. Indiana traditionally almost always goes red. It hasn't voted for a Democrat in president since 2008, since the first time that Barack Obama ran for president. He was actually able to win Indiana. We know that the Harris campaign does have momentum right now. We've seen it in the polls. We've seen that, according to polls, the race is close nationally. What about here in Indiana? Does the Harris-Walz ticket, in your opinion, have any chance of carrying the Hoosier state?
Numerically, I think it's very hard. And you never say never, especially when we're talking about polling and candidacies. You're right that Harris has a lot of momentum right now. Oftentimes, when things go up, they come back down, and we'll still have a debate, of course, as we mentioned, and many months until the election. So I imagine many things will change. In Indiana right now, there are a number of different races on the ballot, and the Republicans have just been very dominant in the state. If you're looking back to 2008, as you mentioned with Barack Obama, there were a lot of factors that played that ultimately led Indiana to switch blue for that presidential election. I don't know that's what we'll see in 2024. I would say I don't think it's very likely, quite frankly. It's not to say that that couldn't happen in the future. Really, when you're looking at the states to watch, unfortunately for us, it's not Indiana, but we are surrounded by at least three of them in the Midwest when you're talking about Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And those are the states that most likely the candidates are going to target more around here.
Professor Laura Wilson, political science professor with the University of Indianapolis, joining us here on the News at 7. Professor Wilson, thank you.